interrupt this program to bring you Courage, the Cowardly Dog Month.
Whole month of Courage, the Cowardly Dog. First appearing in 1996, it was picked up by Cartoon Network, who work in the middle of Burbank, and directed by cartoonist John Dilworth. Though many years have passed since the original air date, it's now time for Zack to celebrate this great show.
Well, old sport, what do you think? Neat. Hey guys, Zack here, and welcome back to Courage Month. So today's reviews that we're going to be reviewing for you guys are Car Broke Phone Yes and Cowboy Courage. Both of which are kind of fun, so let's just get into both of those. Okay, so this first episode, Car Broke Phone Yes, is very interesting because once again aliens visit the farm, because that is just a recurring thing through this show. If it's not something supernatural or weird, it's aliens. That's just the long and short of it. So but in any case, this episode opens up with Courage actually spying stargazing from using the telescope in the attic. And as he's actually stargazing, he actually notices a shooting star, or at least what he believes to be a shooting star, which flies through the sky, bounces off some planets, which Courage notes is neat. Sees the bounce along the rings of Saturn, which causes the rings of Saturn to fall off, which is bad. Which Courage admires, but then things take a turn for the weird when it goes through the bottom of the Big Dipper, which, if you guys don't know, it's supposed to be just giant. It's supposed to be like, it's very much supposed to be like Ursa Major or Ursa Minor, but another thing it's known for is the Big Dipper because it looks like a spoon. So it goes through the bottom of the Big Dipper and a bunch of water pours out, which Courage notes is weird. And then it also passes by the dinosaur with the tennis racket, which is a recurring character apparently now. So who just barely misses swatting at what is believed to what the shooting star with its racket, but then starts bathing using the water from the Big Dipper, which Courage is when Courage finally checks out. At which when he looks through the spyglass again and sees the star actually hit the Earth, which he notes is bad, and he decides to go and tell Muriel about it. With Eustace just being annoyed at all of Courage's babbling, since Courage is trying to explain to her exactly what he saw, but she merely responds that a trip to the arcade would just be lovely, which, if that's not an episode, I kind of want to see that now, especially since John Dilworth has been trying to get the series rebooted a whole bunch, which he hasn't had much success with it yet, but he has been trying to get it rebooted. So maybe you'll see that. I will comment on that further in a later video, but just note that he's been trying to get the series to come back. It hasn't been successful, but he has been trying. But in any case, as Courage is trying and failing to actually explain what he actually saw to Muriel, a strange visitor comes to the door. We don't actually see his face. He's wearing an overlong trench coat and a top hat. And he jumps to the door, responding, and asks him and says the iconic car broke phone. Yes. So he's trying to get. So long story short, he's trying to get in contact with He's trying to get a call on the phone, but Eustace merely remarks that they don't have a phone as the phone goes off, much to Eustace's chagrin, and he tries to play it off that they don't have a phone by yelling into the phone that they don't have a phone, but Muriel merely yells at him to not be polite and invites the strange man in. And the man then proceeds to pick up the phone in its entirety and tries to call the tow truck using the base of the phone as the receiver, which isn't how that is supposed to work. But after putting the phone down, he then sits down and starts taking everything in. But notice that Courage is actually staring at him. So at which point it's revealed that this is some sort of extraterrestrial creature, or at least somewhat, because a large tentacle protrudes from one of the sleeves, turns Courage inside out, and then the presumed alien then proceeds to swat Courage into the closet where he's no longer able to interfere. And Courage, realizing he's now stuck inside the closet, realizes he now needs to get out, and actually starts peering through the keyhole to actually figure out what's going on outside. And sure enough, the alien is actually going through a checklist which is that as it turns out, he's actually been collecting a series of emotions, and he's actually after kindness next. And first and foremost, he's trying to extract from Eustace, but obviously that doesn't work because Eustace is a bitter, miserable person, and all it really does is piss Eustace off. Eustace is very much asleep, but the alien just notes that he's always getting is a bunch of angry, which implies that Eustace isn't too happy with somebody rooting around in his nose. But then Muriel comes back with some cake, and the alien notes that it is very kind, and then realizes that he has found his source of kindness. And Courage, realizing that the alien is about to try and do something with Muriel's kindness, tries to use all of the things that are in the closet to actually open the door, which aren't working. He tries to weld it open, saw it open, a whole bunch of other crazy things. But in any case, he is unsuccessful at actually getting out of the closet. And eventually, the alien does stick a tentacle up Muriel's nose and actually succeeds in extracting her kindness, which results in her becoming angry and bitter. And she actually kicks the presumed alien out. At which point she lets Courage out of the closet, who is since hollering for her because he can't get out. And he's happy to see her unharmed, but then she beats him over the head with a rolling pin. And at which point Eustace wakes up to observe the whole situation. And what we find out almost immediately is that without her kindness, she effectively becomes another Eustace. Long story short, without her kindness, she's very much just another Eustace. She's bitter, angry, miserable. She wants somebody to make her dinner for her. She constantly calls Courage stupid dog. And long story short, Eustace is just happy that Muriel is very much like him now. So, at which point they both sit down to get ready for dinner and actually reminisce about how much they have in common, which is that they're both bitter, miserable old people. But that's beside the point. While Courage is actually slaving away in the kitchen to actually make them dinner. And after succeeding in actually making them some dinner, he then realizes that the only way to actually save Muriel is to actually find the person who stole her kindness and take it back and return it to her. So he then proceeds to poke his head out the window and try and figure out where the alien actually went. And using the spyglass from earlier, he actually notes that the alien that whatever's there is actually waiting at the bus stop. At which point it then proceeds to disrobe and reveals itself to be a giant brain alien with tentacles for arms and legs. Which Courage then freaks out, but then realizes that he was right on the money, that there was something wrong with the creature in the first place. And then to his surprise, the UFO that then proceeds to pick up the alien, and the alien proceeds to walk inside. So Courage then proceeds to dole out all the stuff. He then proceeds to bring them tea and some sandwiches before leaving, and Muriel just scolds at Eustace that he let the stupid dog get away, and beats him over the head before getting up to go chase after him. At which point Courage comes out to see the giant UFO, and the alien has since started to get on and is actually brought the kindness back to its boss, which is also a giant brain, but this time without the arms and legs. And the alien, and after retrieving the kindness from its subordinate, the brain boss then proceeds to point out that with kindness it can now take over, because now it knows what not to do to be kind. So, it now knows what it needs to not do so that it isn't kind, more specifically, which is kind of convoluted. So, but now that it has kindness, it can successfully take over the world because it now knows what it needs to do to not be kind. So, in any case, the alien then proceeds to get ready to take off. And Courage tries to follow it inside, but he winds up running face first in the door, so he tries to find another way in. At which point the alien then proceeds to get ready to start the engine, at which point Courage discovers that the engine is actually battery powered, and also that the chute leads directly inside the ship. So he takes the battery out and proceeds to get ready to go and climb into the chute, but then Muriel actually comes along, actually complaining about how she made him run all the way there. He made her run all the way there, and is just been upset about how the fact that he didn't do his chores. So at which point Courage panics and climbs into the ship with Muriel close behind. At which point Courage comes in and notes that the brain boss actually has his has Muriel's kindness in one of his tentacles, so he goes to go rip it off. With Muriel then proceeding to close behind him, and Courage does proceed to rip off the tentacle, and gets into a tentacle fight with the little alien that we saw. So they just start slapping each other with their respective tentacles, and eventually the alien does proceed to get its boss's tentacle away from Courage and proceeds to chase him into a corner, while Muriel and the brain boss wind up getting into an argument with each other and just start hurling insults at one another while Courage deals with the other alien. And eventually the alien does get close in on Courage and decides to try and get rid of him, but Courage, realizing he actually has a bottle of concentrated kindness in his hand, then proceeds to splash some into the alien's face, which causes it to become kind and polite. So the alien then apologizes for its rudeness and lets Courage go on his merry way, who then proceeds to pick up Muriel and escape, and with the alien opening the door for him, and Courage leaves, at which point the alien remarks to his boss that Courage is such a kind dog. At which point Courage then proceeds to come back with a bomb and blows the thing up sky high as he runs away. And now with the aliens dealt with, Courage then proceeds to he gets blown away by the explosion, by the way. But with the aliens now dealt with, he then proceeds to return Muriel's kindness to her. He also almost drops it, but that's beside the point. But he does return her kindness to her, and she returns back to normal, and Courage is very happy to have his owner back. At which point that they proceed to get ready to curl back up on Muriel's rocking chair, with Eustace just being annoyed that she's no longer the bitter, miserable person that she was 5 minutes ago. So he decides that he has had enough and enough. And decides to just sit down and go back to reading his paper, since obviously there's nothing entertaining for him anymore. But Muriel merely points out that Eustace should actually thank Courage, since thanks to him, there are no longer any more aliens. But then a bunch of other brain aliens show up at the house, and Courage then proceeds to freak out. So yeah, this episode is kind of interesting in that the aliens show up and obviously want to steal Muriel's kindness, and obviously they want to take over the world using that somehow. But more to the point, this episode shows that Muriel is just a bout of kindness away from being Eustace. Long story short, that's what this episode sets up. Without her kindness, she's basically Eustace. And yeah, this episode does point out that that's the main difference between them. Eustace is bitter and miserable, whereas Muriel is kind and compassionate, and that is the only difference between the two. Otherwise, they are basically the same person. But in any case, that's my review of Car Broke Phone Yes. Onward to the next episode. Okay, so this episode, Cowboy Courage, is actually interesting in that it's not so much a supernatural threat or anything, but rather it's just Courage hearing a story about an old lawman, and he kind of self-inserts himself and several characters from the world of Courage the Cowardly Dog into the story. So it starts off with Muriel actually starting a story about that winds up being the basis for the episode of Cowboy Courage. And as she's actually reading the story of a lawman who comes into town and gets his new badge, Eustace is actually grumbling away in the background as he's kind of as he's going through his bills, and notice that they're ludicrously high, or at the very least he doesn't want to pay them. And then proceeds to storm out of the room, proclaiming that they're not going to get his money, and that he's going to go to the grave with all of his money, and proceeds to take them and throw them into the kitchen fireplace, or at least the living room fireplace, whatever fireplace. They have two fireplaces. That's been established. So though the one may or may not be actually in the room, depending on whether or not the episode calls for it. But in any case, after Eustace deals with basically commits tax fraud, Muriel then proceeds to continue the rest of the story, and while she's continuing the story, Courage proceeds to nod off and go and have a little bit of a dream. So this, at which point we're introduced to the sheriff, who is a self-insert for Courage, who is Courage's self-insert, so he looks exactly the same but with a cowboy hat. And as Courage is running into the town, we're actually reintroduced to Floyd, John Bond, and a new character, the Mayor of Nowhere, who may or may not exist. Because it's ambiguous as to whether or not the Mayor of Nowhere actually exists, because he kind of only, I think he only ever like appears in this one episode and then never again. I think he also appears in the crossover movie that I'm going to be doing the watch along of at the end of the month, but it's ambiguous as to whether or not he exists, since it's very, in any case, it's implied that he may or may not exist, and that Courage may or may not have made him up, because I'm not entirely sure I don't think he ever officially appears. He shows up as the mayor of Little Dusty Town, but we never actually meet him personally. But in any case, the mayor, John Bond, and Floyd show up and decide to actually award the cowboy with the title of mayor, which not with the title of mayor, but with the title of sheriff, with them, but they're not entirely clear what he actually did to earn the position. So Floyd just makes it up that he showed up and showed bravery of just showing up in the town. And the mayor, after rewarding him with the title of sheriff, they decide to actually dip out and leave. So they go back to their respective businesses. At which point Courage walks into a saloon and winds up getting slapped by the door and kicked by a cow. So he goes, and at which point the cowboy just kind of shakes it all off and winds up going into the bar. And he's initially very confident with his job. He's initially very confident to be the sheriff of Little Dusty Town, but as he's walking through the bar, people start noticing that he is indeed the new sheriff, and point out that that's kind of a suicide, because as they point out, the sheriff has always run off and will be dead within a week. So Courage becomes increasingly skeptical about the fact that he's going to be actually upholding the law like he thinks he's going to be. But in any case, Cowboy Courage then proceeds to go up to the bar, at which point we're reintroduced to Mr. Mouse, who offers to buy Courage a drink. And I'm saying reintroduced because this is an alternate universe that may or may not exist, because it's all in Courage's head. But Mr. Mouse then proceeds to pay for a drink for Courage, and then proceeds to tell him the story about how there's a bunch of rumors going around that one of their most notorious criminals, the Whip, is actually going to come back, and that all 21 of Cowboy Courage's predecessors have actually run off because they heard the rumor, and then they panicked and ran for the hills. At which point Mr. Mouse wishes him best of luck and is presumed to leave the city, presumably to go to Albany, because that's what's actually stated on his what is it called, his suitcase. At which point we're reintroduced to Minnie, who is Muriel's AU stand-in. And she proceeds to tell Cowboy Courage the full story about what's actually going on. So as she explains, the Whip used to date the Whip, and as she explains, the Whip was a very notorious criminal. But a year ago, on that exact day, a year ago, he had several partners, and as they were robbing the bank, he was set up, and which led to his death. Although it's not explained how he died. In any case, the Whip's been gone a year, but his last words were he'll be back in a year to get revenge on everybody who swindled him, which freaks Cowboy Courage out a little bit. But she points out that there's no possibility of the Whip coming back, and that he should just relax and not worry about it. But as it turns out, the rumors were completely true, because the Whip, who is revealed to be Eustace's AU stand-in and is actually his own character, he shows up and starts threatening his old partners. Cowboy Courage and Minnie are actually doing a song and dance routine in the bar when they actually hear a whipping sound and go out to investigate to discover John Bond, whose clothes have been shredded, and he actually has a large W gashed into his clothes. He tells them to get out of town while they still can, before crawling off into the distance, and we never see him again. At which point they hear another whipping sound and go to investigate and discover Floyd hung up by his shoes from one of the signs outside one of the buildings, and also discover that he also has a W carved into his clothes. So they go to investigate and try to figure out who did this to him. And Floyd is shaking and nervous, so he can't really answer right away. But he then just tries to explain that it's the whip, but he can't quite get the word out because he's scared. So Minnie tries to kind of come correct him and try to figure out what he's trying to say. But eventually he does say that it was indeed the whip and tells them to run for his lives and then runs off. At which point they hear another whipping sound, this time from the mayor's house, and they actually go to investigate and poke and look through the window, and they discover that the whip has indeed returned and is threatening the mayor by pointing, and with the mayor trying to claim that it wasn't his fault and that it was all the mayor, the butcher and barber's fault, which are implied to be Floyd and John Bond in this case, but Cowboy Courage actually sees the whip going to town on the mayor and tries to run away, but Minnie won't let him, and telling him that he's the sheriff and it's his job to uphold the law and be brave. With Cowboy Courage remarking that he isn't really going to like it, but he realizes he kind of has no choice. But in any case, as the whip actually whips off the mayor's hair, mustache, and clothes, eventually the mayor does eventually confess to his wrongdoings and does point out that he did hide it in a safe behind a painting. And the whip goes to remove the painting, only to discover that it's a picture of his ex-girlfriend Minnie, and becomes angry. It becomes angry with the mayor for stealing his girl, as it were. And Minnie just merely remarks to Cowboy Courage that you date the guy once, and he thinks he owns you. With Cowboy Courage just nodding in agreement. At which point the whip then proceeds to whip away the painting, and also whip open the safe, which is revealed to have all the money that he was due. And the whip then proceeds to take it and pockets it. But at which point he notices Cowboy Courage and Minnie standing outside, and proceeds to go confront them, and points out that he isn't really in the mood for dealing with the lawman, and tries to scare him off, and then proceeds to whip all of Courage's fur off, as well as his hat, which Cowboy Courage then proceeds to modestly cover himself, and then proceeds to run off. At which point he tells Minnie that he's coming with her because he's not going to let her be stolen by another guy, because he now thinks that Courage is trying to steal his girl as well. So he tries to actually winds up kidnapping her, even though she is adamant that she's not going to go with him. At which point she's scooped up by the whip, and he tries to escape on his own horse, but the horses are these little stick horses, the ones that you would play with when you were kids. So he winds up breaking his own horse by jumping on it a little too rough, so he steals Cowboy Courage's horse, which he also breaks, at which point the whip points out that the horses are a lot cheaper than they were back in his day, and proceeds to actually kind of run off and leave on foot. At which point Cowboy Courage, disguised as a telegram deliverer, actually brings him a telegram telling him to put down Minnie or else, and the whip is confused because he doesn't really understand what the or else means. So Cowboy Courage comes back, this time with a package, and the whip does put Minnie down to investigate the package, and pointing out that it isn't his birthday, and discovers that it's actually a sheet with a target on it, and he stands on it to try and figure out what it's supposed to be. At which point a military plane shows up, which isn't really, it's set in a time period, but whatever. And drops a piano on the whip's head, which presumably kills him for good. And for their bravery, Minnie and the cowboy and the sheriff are picked up and given a parade. And Minnie remarks that she's by showcasing his bravery, she's actually grown to respect the cowboy, and remarks that he's actually that he actually has shown her the true meaning of courage, which then proceeds to repeat as back in the real world. Muriel tries to wake Courage up because he fell asleep before he could finish the story. They could finish the story, and Muriel then remarks that with the whip dealt with, the story Minnie and the cowboy actually wound up living happily ever after. But then, weirdly enough, the whip actually shows up and remarks that the story isn't over yet, and then proceeds to ride off on his own horse, with Courage putting his cowboy hat on, and then remarking that, "Here we go again, partner." So yeah, this episode is interesting. So this episode takes place entirely in Courage's head for the most part, although this episode, the ending of this episode does seem to ambiguously imply that it may or may not have been a dream, which is interesting. That is kind of interesting and weird, but yeah, it is heavily implied that this episode is a dream, but we're not entirely sure if it's 100% because the whip suddenly just shows up outside the dream, which I'm assuming is just supposed to be this sort of jokey thing where it's like, yep, the story's not over yet. Get ready, partner. Yeah, it's very much supposed to be a dream, and it's just a little the whip may or may not exist kind of joke at the end. So, which is how they normally run the episodes. So it does kind of work, but yeah, I can understand the ending of this episode confusing some people because while the entire episode does take place within a dream and none of it actually happens, the whip suddenly appearing out of nowhere when he's not supposed to exist is definitely one of those things that could definitely confuse you, especially since the whip isn't supposed to exist. He exists entirely in Courage's imagination, so he's not supposed to be here. I can understand the ending of this episode confusing some people. But in any case, that is my review of Courage the Cowardly Dog. What you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well if you want to help support me, especially since this is a very big project. And if you want to see more big projects like this, by all means, link is down in the description. Be sure to go fund me over there and help support me so that I can make more of these. And also, if you want to see more content from me, there's actually 2 ways you can do that. One is by checking out my Twitch. Link is down in the description. I stream every Sunday at 2:30 Eastern Standard Time. So if you can come check those out, I would be happy if you actually went and did that. But also more to the point, I am streaming horror games to go along with Courage Month down there. So be sure to go check that out. And also maybe follow me so I can fulfill a milestone. But yeah, just go help support me that way. And finally, if you actually do want to see even more content from me beside that, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas above, it is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But regardless of whether or not to do any or all of those things, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!